You can't deny the beauty behind a painting created by someone who is truly initiated. Just like you can't deny the beauty of Mozart or Bach, for example, even if you don't like classical music. You might not like classical music, and yet it's beautiful by its very nature. Why? Because we're dealing with composers who know their language, who know the different rules that make up music. It's the same for jazz. Jazz, a good jazz composer, a real connoisseur. I might not like jazz, but I can't deny that this piece is beautiful.
Thank you for being with us and welcome. Thank you for sharing and commenting on all the shows we bring you. And this one, I know it's going to spark some reactions. Always kind, of course, since we're going to talk about beauty. We're going to talk about real beauty. And above all, we're going to talk with someone who has decided to rehabilitate, if I could put it that way. It's his mission to rehabilitate pictorial language. If that's not a life mission, then someone needs to tell me what is. Gilbert, I don't want to mispronounce your name. How do you pronounce it?
Wolfisburg.
Wolfisburg. There we go, Fisburg. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
So much. I was saying that this is your mission, and you yourself say it, to rehabilitate pictorial language through, indeed, painting, colors, and the energy that comes from your creations and your teachings. Quite a mission.
Yes. It's a wonderful mission. It's a wonderful mission that I gradually fell into over the course of my journey. Actually, I attended various schools in Geneva, and then one day I met a master, a true master. Even though I thought I was already a painter before meeting him, I realized that in the end, I didn't really know much. The things they teach us today in official or standard schools, let's say.
We're talking about art here, of course.
We're talking about painting more specifically.
And so, yes, at school, they do teach you certain basics that obviously, according to what you're saying, they wouldn't be the right ones.
They're watered down, they're simplified. And then, of course, the day you meet a master who introduces you to the real tools used by the classical, modern, and contemporary masters, it opens up doors that are wonderful and that had never been opened for me before in my own journey.
With a spiritual dimension?
With a spiritual dimension that comes gradually as you work with these tools, which isn't necessarily needed at the beginning, but as you get deeper into these tools, for example, let's talk about harmony. When you paint, you hear a lot about harmony of forms, composition. For example, when we talk about composition, nowadays people often rely only on feelings and emotions. The heart alone isn't enough for a painter. What else?
Do you mean?
A lot of things. What you need in addition is to become aware that you're working within a defined space. And that, since forever, painters have used geometry and mathematics as tools to strive for harmony, to strive for beauty.
The feeling I have is that I feel like I've joined a family.
In the evening, you just want to go back over every activity and dig into every little detail to learn more.
In the last exercise, there were even words that came up about harmony.
Simple exercises, but effective.
You can feel there's a wonderful community, a lot of kindness.
But today, I'm really listening to my feelings, and that's what brought me here. I had two choices. The first one fell through. The second one, it's even better.
We've welcomed a lot of people here who later became therapists, or not actually, and who say just how much. Artistic creation through painting, through the medium of painting, has an absolutely phenomenal dimension, energy, and even power. And this need for expression, because it is a need for expression. And what is quite surprising is realizing how insensitive some people are to it. Me,
You, yes, indeed. You dare.
I say things as they are, and we're honest here.
Well, imagine.
That painting, when I see a painting, I admire the people who admire that painting. And they remain like that, sometimes for hours, admiring or feeling or receiving the message that the painting delivers. I don't feel that way.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Even when you go see the great masters, even when you go see, even worse.
Even worse,
Worse yet,
an abstract painting moves me more, you see? So I'm really going to exaggerate here, and I truly don't mean to offend. But when you have 3 brushstrokes like this, and then 3 brushstrokes like that, and that's it, I might actually be more touched by that than by a painting from a great master. When you have people traveling millions of miles to see the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, that doesn't move me. What does that say about me, do you think, when someone isn't moved by a... You gonna tell me that art is subjective, but still?
maybe it's just that it's not necessarily your preferred form of expression. Maybe you're more moved by music, maybe you're more touched by dance, by poetry, by literature. But in any case, I reassure myself by saying that there are millions of people who are moved by painting.
Obviously, and fortunately, otherwise you wouldn't be here, of course. What is painting? Because you say you've met certain masters, of course, but you started at the very beginning, if I can put it that way. Why was painting such an essential means of expression for you?
I think it was already set pretty early on in my childhood. I remember that I had abilities and ease with drawing, something that felt natural to me. And then, little by little, I was always moved by painting. Later, I actually turned more towards sports, and painting came back to me around the age of 20. That's when I really started my journey as a painter. And even my true initiation happened a bit later, around age 27. And actually, it's funny because when you talk about abstract painting, there are some truly great masters who do abstract art. You shouldn't think that masters are only the classic Italian, Spanish, or French artists we see in museums. There are also some truly great masters who create abstract paintings. Simply put, what sets apart a master who does abstract painting from my neighbor or someone who paints just for the fun of it is knowledge. Actually, beauty, which we were talking about earlier, comes from knowledge. Beauty isn't just a spontaneous gesture.
And sometimes it also comes from channeling.
A lot.
A lot of people paint, actually, as a way to let things out because they receive this information, they have these feelings, and they need to. So some people, of course, will compose music, others prefer automatic writing, and others will paint because it's a form of expression that allows them to release this channeling. Do you also paint through channeling?
No, not really.
No?
Not really. Or at least, there's a whole preparation first.
Mental?
Yes, intellectual.
Intellectual?
Intellectual. And afterwards, during the act of painting, there can be pipes. Absolutely. The
Mental prep.
wouldn't call that channeling because I'm not consciously channeling, but it's clear that we're surrounded. You can feel that you're surrounded by energy, by good spirits when you're creating. Actually, creation is a magical act in a way.
Absolutely. Especially when you find yourself in front of a blank canvas. You're standing there, you've got your palette of colors, your brushes.
You
Have to make something come out of it. You're not going to wake up one morning and say, at 8:30, I have to start painting. I don't think it works like that.
No, and besides, it's rarely right on the blank canvas. Usually there are preparatory works. There's an idea, there's a desire to create, but you have to shape it, give it an aesthetic form, and generally you go through preparatory work.
So you started by saying, you said that from the age of 20, something brought you back. Indeed, to painting. Are you aware of what brought you back to painting? The reason why?
I think I was completely off track. and one day I came across a poster in the middle of the street while I was walking my dog. And I remember reading it because there were quite a few points explaining a bit about the teaching being offered. And as I was reading it, something started to resonate inside me. And so I went to check out that workshop. I started by doing an initiation, even though, once again, my real initiation happened later on. But in any case, it was a first step into the world of painting, working with an easel, being in a studio, being in that atmosphere of creativity and creation.
I was going to say it's 50-50. There's 50% that's the atmosphere, the vibe, the creative energy. And 50% is the act of painting itself. Would you agree with that? Do you need to have both? Or is the percentage too strict?
Yeah, I think it's a bit strict. And I think a true artist should be able to paint no matter the atmosphere, no matter the vibe. Even though, of course, it's a support, and it does create a special energy to find yourself in a studio. But he often liked me to, because I was preparing for an exhibition, to paint in the rough. No matter what was around me, it was really about the painting. It's a physical, emotional, and spiritual connection that's very powerful. It's true that your surroundings matter, but I think it comes from within first.
How would you define your work as?
A painter? I've actually become more of a teacher. I've become more of an educator, someone who passes on the knowledge I was introduced to. So my last exhibition goes back to 2018. I paint every day because I do demonstrations for my students. But I'm no longer practicing regularly to organize shows, to paint, and so on. But I haven't lost hope. Not that it'll necessarily come back, of course, but right now I really feel like I'm in the role of someone who passes things on.
And that's also the reason why you're here, obviously.
Absolutely.
Second stage of your life. We talked about the milestone at age 20, and the next one is 27, right?
Yeah, 27.
A particular encounter?
Yes, actually, I had done an exhibition with my friend at the time. And we did really well. We sold almost all the paintings, and then we went to Mexico and Guatemala for a few months. And when I came back, I had this feeling like, hey, I need to go further. I need to search for more. And someone had given me the address of a man in Paris, Mr. Lucho Lube, with whom I ended up studying. And I actually went to see him. Originally, I wanted to go to art school in Paris, but I was rejected because I was too old. I was 25, and that was already too late. So I ended up checking out a few Parisian studios. And when I knocked, on his door, I still remember this tall man with long hair, kind of like Albert Einstein.
Artists.
Yeah, an artist who welcomed me, and right away I had the spark again. I said, yes, this is it. This is where it happens.
Why do you consider him a master?
Because he was the holder of a long chain of knowledge. You know, nowadays, there have been philosophical movements that we call postmodernism. These movements came along and basically destroyed everything. They dared to say beauty doesn't exist, rules don't matter, everything is equal, everyone is an artist, and everyone can create their own language. And in doing so, we kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater.
That being said, when you look at certain works of art, you do start to think that anyone can be an artist.
Yeah, that's a common misunderstanding people can have. Are you thinking of someone in particular, like Pollock, or...?
I don't necessarily have the references for that, or the intellect, to be honest. On the other hand, I've obviously seen some reports in the media about things that have been exhibited, especially in Paris, or so-called works of art, or even, let me tell you something, if you go to the Nice airport, you know the Nice airport, there's a huge roundabout between Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. A huge roundabout with a sculpture that's just ugly and rusted all over. And they'll tell you, no, but that's art. You see what I mean? Or you have these people who'll stick a pump or a shoe onto a wall with a big piece of duct tape. And people will actually consider that art. Well, there you go. All of this is still pretty subjective. And you think anyone could become an artist when you see that.
That is to say, there's some confusion. And it's true that painting evolved very quickly in the 20th century. Doors were opened one after another until we got to Pollock's action painting, for example. And when people saw Pollock's paintings for the first time, they said, "You know Pollock, right?"
Action painting?
It's action painting, splattered. But the thing is, Pollock doesn't just throw his paint around any old way. It's intentional. He understands the principles of structure, the principles of how elements relate to each other. That's one of the examples that led to confusion. But Rothko, too. There was a really beautiful Rothko exhibition about 2 years ago in Paris at the Louis Vuitton Museum.
What about him?
He makes these big squares of color stacked one on top of the other. You could reduce it to just big squares of color, but it's so much more than that. And often you hear that kind of comment. Well, my 2-year-old daughter could do the same thing. Or try doing that to a Picasso. The problem is we don't all have the codes, we don't all have the tools to really get into the painting and see what's beautiful. What is beauty anyway? Beauty is also about coherence. Beauty is also something that works on its own. And that meets certain criteria, certain principles of composition, like the golden ratio, for example, which is one of the important principles when we talk about composition.
What is the golden ratio?
The golden ratio is a proportion between two segments that's considered perfect, that's seen as extremely harmonious. You can find it in nature. You see it in seashells, in leaves, between planets, and even in the human body. And it's been used for a very, very long time. The Egyptians used it, the Greeks used it, and painters used it too, especially to divide up space. Today, when we talk about the golden ratio, it's often in a very simplified and popularized way, mentioning 4 points. These are supposed to be the magic points on a painting where things should line up, the steeple of a church, or a carefully placed spot. But actually, the golden ratio is much more than that. It's a series of measurements on which a structure is built. We create a structure with rhythms. And on that structure, we paint. I'm not here to give you a painting lesson. That's not the point.
But
we could talk about it at length. It's important to
understand that.
And the great masters we talk about, Picasso, Pollock, Rothko, they know these principles and use them. I think you're referring, for example, to that painter, that sculptor who's kind of the champion of postmodernism, the one who exhibited at Versailles and who, what was his name again?
I forgot his name, but you picture him perfectly. There's another really, really famous painter whose canvases sell for millions of dollars. He's the guy who only paints in black.
Yes.
Have you ever seen his paintings?
Of course, I know him by heart.
There you go. Once again, I think you really need to have some knowledge first, and then a pretty strong artistic sense, a sensitivity to be able to receive the act of creation from the artist. To understand that, because honestly, it's beyond me. Well, we're not there yet, but in any case, you say that you teach the great aesthetic principles that actually allow us to achieve beauty. That's what we were talking about. But first, we still need to define what beauty is.
Yes.
What is beautiful to you? So I can see if it matches what I think is beautiful.
Beauty is something very objective. Of course, we tend to think there's a subjectivity to it. You might say, yes, but for you, that's not beautiful. That's true to a certain extent. But we can say that intrinsically, a painting is beautiful, again, because it meets certain criteria. A sculpture is beautiful because it meets certain criteria. Beauty comes from observing nature. It comes from observing certain phenomena. And from there, we developed rules to construct, to distribute the amounts of color, for example, so that there's a relationship between these amounts of color. So we're far from a spontaneous and emotional gesture, but there's really a whole process involved. We connect the elements on different levels: composition, harmony of shapes, colors, and so on. And from there, when this result is achieved, it might not be appreciated by someone, but you can't deny the beauty behind it, a painting created by someone initiated. Just like you can't deny the beauty of Mozart or Bach, for example, even if you don't like classical music. You might not like classical music, and yet it's beautiful by nature. Why? Because we're dealing with composers who know their language, who understand the different rules that make music what it is. It's the same with jazz. A good jazz composer, a real expert, I might not like jazz, but I can't deny that this piece is beautiful.
Why do you feel called to this mission of rehabilitating or bringing beauty back to life? Also, you talk about awakening minds through painting.
There were several events that pushed me in this direction. After being introduced to it, I took on a regular job because you have to make a living. And then I was so unhappy in that regular job that I started thinking, hey, maybe I'll open a studio, I'll teach what I've learned, and so on. The thing is, I had a good position that paid pretty well, and it's not easy to leave a job and take risks to open a studio from scratch. And then, one fine day, as I was leaving a dinner with friends, with this idea spinning around in my head for a while. And I was getting more and more hassled at work with people saying things like, yeah, you showed up at 8:03 when it was supposed to be 8 o'clock. You know, the Swiss, this was at an insurance company that helped Swiss people. Actually, the more pressure I got from the outside, the more I wanted to leave and find my own path again. And as I was leaving that dinner, I looked up at the sky and saw a galloping horse. And for me, that was a sight. I told myself, go for it, go start your painting workshop. That's the first step.
Explanation.
And
Cloud. But
con. A cloud, that's a sign. If you're even a little bit open, if you're even a little bit sensitive, the universe is constantly communicating with us. But we're so caught up in our minds, in the difficulties, the ups and downs of life, that we don't see what's happening. And at that moment, I was especially open, and the horse was a sign. That's the first step. I opened my studio in Geneva in 2002. Then, in 2015, I was going through a bit of a tough time. Divorce, separation, and so on. I was leaving the apartment. I found myself at a painting workshop, and in the evening, before falling asleep, I heard, "Put your classes online." But really, I hear the voice coming to me just like that. And I jump up all excited saying, yes, that's awesome, and so on. And 3 minutes later, I think, okay, but how am I going to do it? And since then, so that was in 2015, in 2016, I started the Culture Painting Project, where I began teaching. To share this knowledge, to offer it to people who are interested online through this project called Culture Painting.
a word about the horse, you see.
Right inside of.
This creation of nature with these clouds. Okay, you see this horse, and in fact, a lot of kids also have fun sometimes looking at the clouds and saying, hey, does this make me think of this or that? If you have that kind of inspiration, well, the image really is beautiful. However, the symbolism of the horse doesn't say that. Quit this job and return to your true nature through artistic creation and teaching online. That's not what it means. In any case, I don't see the symbolism of the horse in that. You see what I mean? Why does the symbolism of the horse push you to do that?
I'm a horse in Chinese astrology. I'm a fire horse. And at that moment, I was questioning myself, wondering, should I go for it or not? Should I do it or not? And when I saw the horse, for me, it was immediate. It was instant. I saw the horse galloping and thought, I need to gallop too. I'm not going to let myself get trapped in something, and so on. And it made me think just a little bit. You know Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, which talks about finding your personal destiny, your personal legend? And actually, life always pushes us off that path. The idea is to manage to find your personal legend again. Believe it or not, that horse helped me find my personal legend again.
And to step out of that comfort zone, which was still
Comfort zone.
material one, as you can imagine, to embrace a career as an artist, a teacher, and an educator, which is definitely much riskier and more uncertain.
For sure. Absolutely. Especially when you start from nothing and you take out loans to buy equipment, to advertise, to... Yes, of course, but that's good because it sharpens your skills. I remember that at the very beginning, I didn't have a single student. And what I would do is I still went to concerts. I would stand right at the front of concerts. I would turn around to face the crowd, and I would picture that crowd, telling myself, these are all the students I'm going to have.
Potential.
Yes. And I would visualize them and really feel that moment. And actually, you know how it is. And thank you for sharing this kind of content on this channel. We all know there's a world beyond the physical one, and that we have to use it, that world, and sharpen our tools. And this experience of opening my own studio was, for me, a way to really get into a more regular practice, to believe in my dreams, to visualize, to develop the skills that will make them real. The thing is, when you start from nothing, you can't let yourself be influenced by fear. Because my loved ones would say to me, you're completely...
You could have done things in parallel.
Yeah, I could have, but
You had to cut ties.
you had to cut ties.
You had to cut ties with all the risks and all the questions that could bring up.
Absolutely. And it happened twice because with the Culture Pantura project, it was kind of the same thing. You can't imagine everything it takes to put quality online painting courses together. All the analysis you have to do, all the lines you have to draw, you have to make videos, you have to do editing, you need people who specialize in marketing techniques, and so on. That was another challenge.
Producing a masterclass, and we do that very often ourselves, is truly a full-fledged job. What do you teach, and who are your programs for?
So today, we launched, really, the program in 2022, so it took me about 6 years to settle this up. We have about 2,800 students. I have students all over France, throughout the French-speaking world, and I teach them the major aesthetic principles, the masters, both classical, modern, and contemporary. I teach them how to use the golden ratio in composition, but not just the golden ratio. There are principles of composition. In fact, painting has evolved. It's a language that has changed over time. So we didn't just stick to the knowledge of the masters, but that knowledge hasn't disappeared. We still use it today, and it keeps getting richer and richer. For example, the industrial era brought new principles of composition. Painters like Cézanne introduced new ideas. So I teach this idea of language. Painting is like a language. You have to learn this language. And I was really frustrated when I watched the films about Rothko made by the Louis Vuitton Museum, where they only talked about the sensitive side, the poetic, emotional aspect. That's the message they keep hammering into us all the time. Poetry, creativity, emotion, feeling, when in fact there's a real intellectual language, real knowledge. That's what I teach.
And it can be learned.
You're not born a painter or just naturally talented. That's not enough. You have to go through training and initiation.
So that means if I follow the initiation you recommend, I'll be able to rediscover and decode beauty.
Exactly. And I'm convinced that you'll come to love painting and that you'll find yourself standing in front of paintings that right now don't move you any more than...
They don't move me.
Yeah, you need tools. You need tools to decode.
But does that mean you can follow your teaching without wanting to paint?
Yes.
Absolutely. You can follow it just to understand.
To understand, to get much more enjoyment when you go to museums. Because otherwise, you go to museums and you just kind of stay on the surface. How many people go to museums and don't have the tools? But when you have the tools, you get into the inner workings of the painting and the pleasure is multiplied. Because suddenly you understand why this element is there, how this element interacts with that other element over here, how the internal flow was organized, how the elements are placed exactly where they are in a very deliberate and thoughtful way. And that's where beauty emerges from. It doesn't come from anywhere else. It's not the subject itself that creates beauty, it's how I handle the subject.
Are you sure that all these great painters you're talking about did this kind of work you're describing? Did they really do the work you're talking about here?
Yes.
Are you sure about this alignment, this golden ratio, this way of structuring? Are you sure about that?
Yes, I'm convinced of it. Why? Because I have the tools to analyze it, to see it, to observe it. Of course.
Sure.
And if we no longer have the tools, and the tragedy today is that the major art schools no longer teach this. Why? Because we're caught up in this postmodern wave and so on. So it's high time, it's urgent to return to this knowledge, to these skills, which are actually a heritage, a legacy of our culture, of humanity, in which we're letting slip away, just like that, losing them in favor of all this nonsense, this idea that everyone is an artist. Yeah, it's pretty disastrous, when in fact we have a real heritage, real knowledge. They're right there, but they're no longer being taught.
A time when there are sectors in French, European, and even global culture that are suffering. Music is suffering greatly, films are suffering too, because there are new technologies that are sometimes incredibly impressive, and I'm especially thinking of artificial intelligence. If tomorrow, and I'm convinced that tomorrow, could you be amazed by an artificial intelligence in front of a painting that has absorbed all the criteria you teach and would be able to perfectly reproduce a painting, and you were completely blown away? You think that's possible?
And
Does that work?
absolutely, absolutely. No, it doesn't worry me because fortunately, actually, artificial intelligence isn't really that smart. In fact, it just records images. And then, for example, what amazes me is that you give it 15 Rembrandt paintings and it spits out a 16th painting in the style of Rembrandt. And that painting, at first glance, in any case, is really impressive. But if you analyze it a little more deeply, you'll see that the composition isn't quite right. But the first impression is already very, very good.
So forgers can relax.
I think so.
It's not for
Tomorrow. No, it's not happening anytime soon. You'd have to teach all these criteria to...
the AI.
But then, what does it actually convey? This artificial intelligence or these images today? What do they really transmit? Is there any real depth? Do they touch the heart? Do they touch the soul? Because beauty, in some way, connects us to life.
But when you say, did we manage to reach beauty? Did we manage to touch the soul?
Yes.
It's an abstract dimension. But when you teach, there's a very concrete dimension because there are rules. Follow.
Yes.
How can these rules, which we have to follow so concretely, actually touch the soul on such an abstract level?
Are you following me? Yes, I'm following you completely. Actually, once again, we have to go back to the source. These rules, they were drawn from nature, from observing nature. Nature itself isn't chaotic. Nature follows rules. It follows proportions, the golden ratio. It's one of the principles that underpins the growth of matter. Our bodies weren't made in a chaotic way. They were designed, they were thought out, you see what I mean? There's a tremendous amount of knowledge, a tremendous logic. And it's the same in painting. So I think that painting, from a therapeutic point of view, is extraordinary. It's really great. There are tons of studies today that show it has an incredible effect on hormones, on the therapeutic act of painting. But it's even more beautiful when you're initiated and you receive the tools that allow you to create something beautiful. Not just unloading your emotions, unloading your channeling. Of course, that's already a first step, and it's very good. But we can go even further. We can become what I call a true knight of beauty because we have the tools, because we have the knowledge, and create beauty, even if it's not always appreciated, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that we gave it our all, and actually, it's an extraordinary journey. Because it's not easy, it's not handed to you right away, it doesn't just fall into your lap. You have to work, you have to learn, kind of like a guitarist or a violinist who has to master their instrument.
Music theory exists for a very specific reason. You don't just play an instrument unless, of course, you're one of those rare people who suddenly turn out to be extraordinary virtuosos who seem to come out of nowhere. There
Aren't many of them.
aren't many of them, but it's true. There are people who don't need music theory and who are self-taught, and they're very good musicians. So nearly 3,000 students have taken your classes. Today, who are these people?
There's a bit of everyone, but I would say mostly women. I also teach in-person workshops. So last summer, I held a workshop in an abbey in Ferrières and Gâtinais, not far from here, where there were about 30 people in person and quite a few following us via streaming. And I would say, to give you an idea, out of the 30 people, there were about 20, maybe 25 women, a few men, people from all walks of life. For example, I have someone who comes from a farming background, but who loves painting and used to paint. And ever since she took these classes, it's been a transformation, a real transfiguration. She's starting to do abstract paintings. She's very hardworking. She's a real go-getter. And now she's about to have her first exhibitions. Yolande, she's going to have her first exhibitions. I also have a whole group who are putting on exhibitions. I think I have people from pretty much every social class, from all kinds of backgrounds. I also have people who are interested in learning about painting, not to become painters themselves, but to have more tools when they visit museums. The paintings of Nicolas de Stael, the paintings of Rothko, the paintings of Joan Mitchell, who is one of the stars of 20th century painting, an American painter. If you show up like that without many tools, you're just going to see lines of painting. You're going to see things that will quickly either overwhelm you or it will just be incomprehensible. Painting also requires a certain picking your time. It doesn't reveal itself right away. In front of a Joan Mitchell canvas, if you just show up and look at it, you'll just walk away. But if you sit down and really try to connect with that painting, even without any knowledge, it's already going to shake you up. It's already going to bring you a lot. There's a lot of impression, a lot of power. Yeah, a feeling of power, of vitality. But if on top of that you have the knowledge, it becomes magical. It becomes extraordinarily beautiful.
Can all paintings have such a high and spiritual dimension as you described? I'm thinking especially of street art paintings. Those people who create masterpieces on walls with spray paint, does that count too? Is that a dimension you can learn through what you recommend? Can you learn to understand it, to perceive it, to feel it, or not?
I think it's a little different. There's the most famous representative, Banksy, who does street art. I would say it's much more about the message being conveyed. When he creates a character with a rainbow or someone holding balloons that are flying away.
Exactly.
We're not necessarily following the aesthetic standards you find in painting.
But are there the rules of order you mentioned?
Now, in my opinion, it's more about the idea of the message. He's very skillful, he's very clever. He often creates characters. The human body, by definition, is harmonious since it meets certain criteria. But it's more on the level of the idea, the concept, that it resonates with us. In street art, what's spray painted on walls, the graphics and all that, there's a certain power, but we're not at all using the same codes.
Without saying codes. So that means that today, the painting you teach, the decoding, because you actually teach how to decode this kind of painting.
And the tools to be able to create it.
And the tools to be able to create it.
Absolutely.
And that's really about having the tools to do this decoding. When faced with a painting, it seems to me, and from a very young age, it seems like an intelligent and interesting approach to me. We should start when we're let them.
Yes, but we actually do the opposite.
Why we do the
opposite? Today, we're starting to cut back on creative hours, on drawing in favor of other subjects. We're still a society that relies a lot on the mind. And of course, what I'm suggesting is very intellectual, but also to bring us back to that original sensitivity that's in the heart.
It's quite certain that you must have taken all of those classes before. Do you remember the EMT classes we had at school?
Well, I'm in Switzerland, so EMT doesn't really mean much to me.
Oh, right. The practical classes we used to have, where we'd try to make things and so on.
Manual work.
And to be honest, I don't remember us ever actually doing any painting at all.
And
studied. Maybe we would have found it boring anyway, as teenagers. I'm not sure it's really the kind of thing we wanted to get excited about. Nah. Is it fun?
Those were the hours when we kind of let go a bit because we had 3 hours of math after that. So when it came to painting, poor things, Painting teachers who, on top of that, are often a bit sensitive, a bit shy. At least that's what I experienced as a student, but I actually liked it. But on the other hand, they didn't teach us the big principles, which makes sense. First, you have to learn how to draw, learn how to handle the brush, and so on.
What do you say to someone who tells you, I'd really love to, but it's just not my thing? Because I don't know how to draw, or I don't know.
I tell them that. Declaring right away, loud and clear, that it's not your thing, maybe you should give it a try. Maybe you just need to go for it. And there's also another misconception, which is that people think a good painter today is someone who can draw perfectly. But actually, painting isn't at all limited to the quality of the drawing, which is just mimetic. Not all good draftsmen become slaves to the subject. They reinterpret it. They bring it to life. So you can be a total dud when it comes to drawing, but there are tools to help you get better. A little bit, but thankfully it goes way beyond just that. And what I'd also say is, if painting isn't your thing, learn to dance, learn music, learn to sing. Because in the end, I think we're fundamentally beings, souls embodied in physical forms. And that soul, it craves this kind of thing.
But knowledge
of creativity. We need creativity.
Does painting always start with drawing first?
It's better that way. Yeah, it's better. But you
paint over the draw?
Oh no. As a study, you start by drawing, doing observational drawing, learning proportions, and so on. But no, once you've learned all those basics, you can go straight to painting.
Easel.
Easel. Yeah, of course.
And you say, in fact, you mention, and it's very beautiful, I really like this phrase, that painting has a precise grammar. So there's a language to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, once again, once you master them, are magical, and they're not taught anymore these days. And it's high time. You know, the experience I've had, which fills me with happiness, is that among the people who have taken my classes, a great many have realized there's truly a treasure there. And I'm just someone who passes on that treasure. I'm not the one who invented it. And they created the Companions of Culture, painting. They created an association in France because they realized that along their journey, some went to art school, some attended different schools, but no one had ever told them about these principles, these tools. And they realized there was a wealth there. Once again, it's a legacy. And they created this association, the Companions of Culture Painting, precisely because the limitation of online courses is that I provide the material. And then at first, I made a ton of videos. We have a Facebook group. I really engaged with everyone. But now there are just too many people. I can't keep up anymore. So the limitation is, how do I help people really absorb this material? That's why the companions are there, to talk with newcomers and help them with their challenges. How should you use the structure? Look at this, that, and so on. But the idea of having the Companions of Culture Painting, I hadn't even imagined it. And I think it's wonderful.
These are groups that, as a result,
hold meetings.
It's fascinating. You mentioned fine arts a few seconds ago. What's in the collective mind, the Holy Grail? When we talk about fine arts, it's really the pinnacle of the pinnacle. And yet you say, if I understood correctly, that the fundamentals you teach aren't there.
Absolutely.
But the fundamentals you teach are the basics. Thank you.
They're basics.
Not in art school?
Fine arts doesn't teach it.
Incredible. Yes.
There are several reasons for that. There's already that postmodernist movement we talked about earlier. There's also the fact that in the 60s and 70s, we saw lots of people who had gone to art school but couldn't make it, to make a living from their art. And we'd find them on the side of the road. So the institutions started asking themselves, well, what do we do with these people? In the end, they completed the art curriculum, but being an artist isn't for everyone. And to tighten your belt, to struggle, to
survive,
and to succeed. So I think that, among other things, what happened is that there were political decisions made to say, okay, fine arts are great, but we're going to add design. In Geneva, it's called the University of Art and Design. Even though, at first glance, design has nothing to do with art. Design is functional. But it allows students to say to themselves, well, hey, let's go into something that's going to pay off because we have a profession, a real job. But we lose the search for the sacred, we lose the pursuit of transcendence, we lose that knowledge. And yes, it's really like a sword cut through the language that has taken place. For different reasons. Also, maybe because an artist is someone who stands outside of society, who can have a slightly different perspective, who, through their message, can unsettle some people. I'm thinking especially of Andy Warhol, when he made his paintings where he depicted Coke cans, Coke bottles, which were actually a critique of the industrial world, of the world of consumerism. And, well, there are several reasons that brought us to this point, but it's really time to reinvest. The field of knowledge when it comes to painting.
Paintings like those by Andy Warhol, there are golden rules.
Well, it's not just about the golden rules. Painting is just one aspect. Yeah, he's someone who has knowledge, but he's more into screen printing and imagery. Little bit pop?
Check out.
Yes, pop art.
Yes, definitely.
So he doesn't go as much into the very technical aspects, but on the other hand, he masters color distribution, he masters contrast, he masters a lot of things.
When you brought it up, you said two words that immediately caught my attention, because I think that's also the case for everyone we have here on the couches who come to talk to us about painting. There are a lot of people who channel these paintings, who just go for it in front of the canvas. They end up with something they can't even describe, but it has a certain vibe. And the two words you mentioned were sacred and transcendence.
Yes.
That dimension, you can understand it when you actually decide to stand in front of a blank canvas, channel things, and try to express what you perceive, hear, experience, and feel. And that's where transcendence is. That's where the sacred is, even if we're not following the codes you teach.
Yes, absolutely. As long as there's real purity, and we're truly a channel. A very, very long time ago, I saw an Indian master named Sri Chinmoy. Well, I had been around that group a little or gotten a bit close to them, and that master painted by channeling. Because he's in bliss, he has realized the self. And so it flows through him. Yes, those people who are extremely pure, extremely connected, will create works that are fascinatingly beautiful. I also think that Tibetan paintings, for example, Tibetan thangkas, which are highly codified, are there to manifest purity, beauty, and the harmony of the spirit.
Regardless of the specific artistic skill level of any painter, you can truly feel the vibration.
Yeah, so it goes beyond just the vibration. Vibration's just one aspect. There really are
Several
layers. It's multidimensional in a way, but either I'm moved or I'm not. And I'm moved when I feel there's real work, real development behind it, and also underlying knowledge. But again, for me, it was a revelation. When I first walked into my master Lou Choulabet's studio in Paris, I loved everything he told me. He would talk to me for hours. There were several of us students. But when I looked at the paintings on the wall, I was like, wow, what is this stuff? I didn't understand it, and I didn't particularly like it. And I was a bit like you. And after 2 years of serious, continuous learning, we filled book after book. We went to see, so Paris is amazing for that, because we went to the museum almost every week. And then we got to see what he taught us in the paintings. Things we hadn't noticed before. It's a bit like taking off the blindfold from your eyes. And by the end of my training, I was fascinated by those paintings. I wanted to buy them because I was finally able to see the beauty, the coherence, the logic behind them. Even though at first their aesthetic didn't really seem convincing to me. But that's because I didn't have the tools.
In any case, those tools, you can go out and get them. You've put 4 courses online, I believe.
Yes, 5 or 6, actually.
5 or 6.
Yes.
These are courses, obviously, that you can do at your own pace, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
In these 4 or 5 courses, do they go up in level, like a progression?
No.
No.
You can,
By the fourth one, just like the first or the sixth.
yeah, absolutely. You can buy, well, it doesn't matter. But I try to cover the whole field of pictorial language. I started with the basic principles, then I moved on to color. We worked for 2.5 years on the color program, since we try to explore both classical harmonies and contemporary harmonies, where they come from. It comes from Schoenberg, from the changes that happened in music. They were also reflected in painting. And yes, they each cover specific areas. You can pick any of them, it doesn't matter which ones.
Is there today, with your level of knowledge, your teaching abilities as an educator and teacher, is there today in the world of painting any artwork that you find yourself amazed by the enthusiasm it generates, while you think to yourself, these are just dawn shadows?
Yes,
Really?
yes, of course. Especially you,
Didn't give any name.
not the great artists. It's current artists who are graduating from art schools today. Or who are the champions of postmodernism that we were just talking about?
Earlier.
It's empty, there's no meaning, there's no...
So what do people like about it then? Why do they sell so much and for such high prices?
Because there's a widespread lack of understanding. There's widespread confusion. There's widespread ignorance when it comes to painting. Since schools haven't taught this kind of knowledge for the past 30 years, we've reached a point where someone can be put on a pedestal simply because of connections, because they're part of the circle of people who pulled the strings behind the scenes. But then you have to separate art itself, which to me is universal, and the art market. But that's always existed, even back in Van Gogh's time. Van Gogh is one example of a painter who was somewhat sidelined, and other painters were preferred at the time. But I assure you, those other painters quickly faded from history, while Van Gogh remained. So after a while, there's a kind of selection that happens. Even if for a time someone can shine in the spotlight, I think painting is first and foremost a personal journey. A journey of initiation, of entering into a kind of knowledge that will profoundly transform us. And we're not here to succeed or to conquer the art market.
That's what I was going to ask you, because you have to make a living.
Yes, you have to make a living.
Out of the 3,000 students, do many of them say, I want to make a living from my art?
Some do, yes. Some have the ability and the ambition to do it. I don't think it's a large number, but maybe around 20%. There are people who have had exhibitions recently in Belgium and France. Yes, of course, some of them. And more, they can be confident that they can make it because they're no longer just drifting in some kind of... when you don't have any tools for painting, you quickly end up in the... Not whether it's good or bad, you just have no reference points to judge what you're doing. And the strength of this knowledge is also having real tools to judge what you're doing and to be able to say, okay, the composition is good, but there's something missing here. When it comes to colors, what's going on except that...
Sometimes, maybe, you'll have people who will tell you, these tools are probably very good, but I prefer to go with what I feel and the movement of my hand.
Yes, that happens a lot. No rules. I don't want to be influenced by knowledge.
I don't want to be influenced by this or that technique, the golden ratio, the golden number, the golden square, sacred this or that, whatever. But you see what I mean? And I prefer to let myself be completely carried away in my artistic momentum. And
yes, but I come across that every day. On Facebook, I run into it every day. And to those people, I say, look at the foolishness of your thinking by making a little analogy, by telling you, go sit at your piano or pick up a violin, just with your feelings and emotions. And there you have the
answer. It's strange
that we
don't use the same reasoning when it comes to a musical instrument or any other artistic discipline. That's crazy, really. Painting is like sculpture. It's the same thing.
At least it doesn't hurt your ears. You can close your eyes
and drift.
True.
It's true. There.
There's that, and And then there's also the fact that painting evolved very quickly and brought confusion on its own, because when you saw a line, while the first person who did that knew exactly what they were doing, we started to experiment with the limits of the language. Malevich's white square on white background, 1910 to 15, that's already the absolute limit, and we went even further. And yet it was done knowingly, with full awareness. So there's a historical confusion.
The black dot on a white canvas, where people stand there for hours marveling, saying, but how did he do that?
No.
But you see,
No.
I'm fascinated by that. I ask myself, but how? And that's where sometimes it even makes you feel guilty, because you think, but what's wrong with me? Am I just not receptive to this? You see? But I've seen paintings. I can't remember this artist who only paints, a really great man who only paints in black.
Yes, but he's amazing.
Incredible. And then I see people, you see this gradient of black, and you're there looking at it thinking, but what is it?
There's one key thing that's interesting. First of all, Solages, he follows mechanical principles that appeared after industrialization, when artists started dividing space mechanically. He responds to that. Another key is actually how space is treated. Rothko, Solages, and others went beyond the classical way of representing space. Foreground, middle ground, background, what we call definitive depth, because we were influenced by Japanese prints. And for the first time, European painters, when they saw Japanese prints, in 1860 to 70, they saw a way of representing space that was completely different, where elements in the back seemed to come forward and so on. And that's what you feel in some of Rothko's best paintings, but is done with full awareness. And actually, it speaks to us about horizontal time and vertical time.
That's why you have to learn, because that's why it has to be learned. That's why you have to follow along. And if you want to really feel the energy, like Gilbert does so well, you need to follow the teaching to understand all of this. It's like, to finish, those paintings that combine both paint and relief, that are both a structure, a sculpture, but at the same time, a painting. And that I find fascinating, except that when you're asked to describe the thing, what do you feel at that moment, and what do you see? I see shapes like this with a little touch of a bit of paint on top of that. And I find it a bit disheartening when you see how much the artist puts of themselves into it.
So,
Much they give of themselves and what they do, how much they want their message. And when you have clueless people like me who show up and just stand there dumbfounded in front of a painting saying, I don't really feel much, it really makes you humble. And then it makes you want to take the master classes and courses you offer. Thank you very much, Gilbert.
thank you.
Thank you so much. You paint? You still paint a little bit?
Yes, I still paint. Actually, right now, with the video programs and the students, because I have about 18 hours of classes, plus I have to make phone calls, respond to people, and then there are the online courses and all that. I paint every day when I'm demonstrating, when I'm explaining things, but again, I'm not practicing regularly on a personal level. Especially since when you're really into it, painting takes up a huge amount of time. When I paint, I can spend the whole night at it, not even going to bed. You're outside of
Time.
and space. And when you have to open the studio at a certain time, you can't really afford that kind of indulgence.
But you still enjoy it just as much.
Absolutely. And I'll start painting again in a little while. The great thing about being a painter is that you can keep painting for a very, very long time.
That's for sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. You always comment so kindly, as always. Of course, feel free to share. We'll put all the links around the video so you can check out what Gilbert has to offer. There are two websites. There's culturepeinture.com, and then there's l-aquarium.ch.
Yes, that's my in-person studio in Geneva.
There you go, in person in Geneva. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself, whether you're an artist or not. But don't be indifferent to art like I am. Greg Scott. Thank you all. We'll see each other again very soon for another round.